Hi everybody, my name is Keith Fries, and today we're going to be checking out this video from Thomas Sowell, who just did an interview with the Hoover Institute. So before I start, credit to the Hoover Institute and to Thomas Sowell for this content. I always put in the video description, no copyright infringement intended, but I just still wanted to give credit out loud as well because I do appreciate this content. But I also say on a more personal note, at the 2024 presidential election, I voted for Thomas Sowell with a write-in vote. No slight against Thomas, but I think, he's being in his 90s, he's probably in no position to be president, and I think he would probably tell you the same. I think he'd probably also tell you that he doesn't want to be president, but I voted for him because I agree with his opinions on America, and I agree with his ideas. And I mostly voted for that, but I also did vote for the man because I do think he's a great man. So I voted for Thomas Sowell for president of the United States. So that's my quick little backstory in terms of recent things that he has done or what I'm acknowledging. So let's get into this video. We may not watch the whole thing, but I'll leave the link down in the description for you guys to check out, and we'll pause it as we go through and kind of break it down. Okay, so here we go. Thomas Sowell.
Empirical questions are questions that must be asked if we are truly interested in the well-being of others. Perhaps the most important distinction is between what sounds good and what works. On the one hand, what sounds good; on the other, what works. Why is that distinction so important?
I guess it was because rhetoric and visions play such a large part in higher education that the question of whether some vision is correct, what they believe is correct. I saw recently a replay of something by AOC, the Congresswoman,
Yes.
From New York. And as I listened to her, I just was amazed that there seemed to be no factual issue as far as she's concerned. She just pronounces things to be so, and that's the end of it. And unfortunately, I think too many certainly, college students and students in high school for that matter, are introduced to a certain vision of the world where, for example, the capitalists are exploiting the workers and so on. And they just memorize that, and they talk about it as if it's a known fact. And there's no developing in those students the ability to look at two different views and try to figure out which of them is correct.
So I'll say about like that first part where the host of the show, it kind of asked him in a different context. What he was saying is like what sounds good versus what actually is good that's being said. I think that's the way I interpreted it. I think it's a better way of kind of explaining it. But essentially, what sounds good versus what actually is good, and I think what Thomas is getting at is that AOC sounds good, but what she's saying is not necessarily good. There have been a lot of people in society that know how to rally the troops and have a big voice and a big personality, and they sound good, but what they are actually saying is not good. And I think that there have been a lot of people that say things really well, but maybe aren't loud and boisterous about it, and they aren't getting crowds of 30,000 people to stand around them and listen or hang on to every word. But what they actually say is powerful. It has substance, right? It's kind of like that whole saying of, the smartest person at the party is the one that's listening, not speaking. And when that person finally does speak, the whole room goes quiet and wants to hear it because it's like, we can't miss this. And I think that's when somebody says something well and people listen, versus being loud and presenting yourself as big and a big personality for the whole party. Well, people are obviously going to see that. You're at a party. There's a lot of people. You're big. You're part of the thing. But like I said, when you are the quiet person and you maybe say just the one little thing, people are going to tend to listen, and you're going to say something that's maybe a bit more powerful and a bit more honest and true, because you're picking your calculated moment to say something versus just saying whatever at all times. That said, I'm going to say about AOC that AOC and people like AOC that are able to generate big crowds, even if they are just saying even if they're just saying something that attracts people, but they're not necessarily saying something of substance, that there's a skill set in that. Having an ability to drive people to you and generate interest is definitely a skill. But here's the way I'm going to put it, is that, like, if you were to start a band and you had a garage band, well, that garage band starts in your garage, and then maybe you play a bar, okay? And then from the bar, you're asked to play a nightclub. And then from the nightclub, you play a 1,000 seated venue. And then from that 1,000, it's 2,000 and 5,000. Then you're doing arenas of 10,000 people. And then you're doing stadiums of 30,000, 40,000, 50,000 people, But if by the time that you get to the arena and stadium phase, if you're still making bad music like you were in your garage, where you haven't fully flushed out your skill set, but you're still doing the garage band set at the stadium or the arena, that just doesn't fly in reality. Like, that would never work. You would never get to the stadium or the arena by learning a G chord. You know what I mean? Like, so by the time that you get there, you've flushed out all the things that aren't necessarily good, and you've honed in on your skill set. So I think the point that Thomas is making, and I don't want to make it for him, but I think what he's trying to say is that AOC is now in a position where she is generating all this interest. She does have these big crowds, and you would expect her to not be playing garage band material at this point. She should want to captivate the 30,000 and turn that into 60,000, into 90,000, 120,000, etc. Like, if you have this big platform, if I had a big platform and I had 30,000 people staring at me while they're hanging on every word, I would certainly want those words to captivate them. I wouldn't want them walking away going, eh. So that. And then he kind of briefly mentioned about students and how they just kind of are told something and they just regurgitate it, and you've regurgitated from the textbook and you think you're wicked smart. Anyway, but we'll get maybe back into that in a second here, but let's continue on with this video.
To me, back when I was teaching, if I taught a course that had a lot of controversial stuff in it, I would spend a great deal of time putting together a reading list where I would find the strongest argument on one side of a particular argument, and then the opposing view, the best example I could find of that, and I would then present that to the students. And when I tested them, I didn't test them on which side you believed. I tested them on whether they understood the arguments on both sides. I suspect, from what I see and hear, that that is something that's rarely done today in education at the college or high school level.
I see. So the old-fashioned principle of teaching, which is that before you make up your mind where you stand, you make sure you understand where the other person stands first.
Yes.
All right.
Capitalism to me, it's an ideology of capital. It puts capital, the most important thing is the concentration of capital, and it means that we seek and prioritize profit and the accumulation.
The idea of trains is that trains are like trains. And the idea of planes is that planes are like planes.
Of money above all else, and we seek it at any human and environmental cost. That is what that means. And to me, that ideology is not sustainable and cannot be redeemed. We've strayed so far away from what has really made us powerful and just and good and equitable and productive. And so I think all of these things sound radical compared to where we are, but where we are is not a good thing. And this idea of like 10% better from garbage shouldn't be what we settle for. A perfect example of how special interests and the powerful have pitted white working class Americans against brown and black working class Americans in order to just screw over all working class Americans is Reaganism in the 80s, when he started talking about welfare queens. Because this one specific group of people that you are already kind of subconsciously primed to resent, you give them a different reason that's not explicit racism, but still rooted in a racist caricature.
Tom, again on your website, factsagainstrhetoric.org, you provide a reading list, but you also provide links to a number of videos and podcasts. Here's one. This is a link to your old professor at the University of Chicago, and then for many years your colleague here at the Hoover Institution, Milton Friedman. In this video, to which you link on your website, Milton is addressing the question, is capitalism humane? Take a look at this, if you would, with me, Tom.
It's true that if you had a concentrated power in the hands of an angel, he might be able to do a lot of good, as he viewed it. But one man's good is another man's bad. And the great virtue of a market capitalist society is that by preventing a concentration of power, it prevents people from doing the kind of harm which really concentrated power can do. So that I conclude that capitalism per se is not humane or inhumane. Socialism per se is not humane or inhumane. But capitalism tends to give free rein, much freer rein, to the more humane values of human beings. It tends to develop a climate which is more favorable to the development, on the one hand, of a higher moral atmosphere of responsibility, and on the other, to greater achievements in every realm of human understanding. Thank you.
All right, that's Milton. Now, it's one matter to argue that capitalism represents the least bad system, but it's another to argue, as Milton did just then, that capitalism produces, quote, I'm quoting Milton in that clip, a higher moral atmosphere, close quote, and again, quote, greater achievements in every realm, close quote. Tom, wasn't your old professor and your Hoover colleague Milton Friedman getting a little carried away there?
I don't think so. But if he was, it was the way to answer would be to put forth opposite evidence to what he's saying, and that's what doesn't happen. That is, a lot of what is called education is really indoctrination. And so it's not a question of whether I happen to agree with Milton Friedman or anyone else who's watching. It's a question of do the people who would disagree with him have any facts, any reasoning, any logic that would be relevant to what he's saying.
So real quick, what he's saying is, and this is the big point, it's that if he's saying something wrong, prove it wrong with facts. Come at him with a logical argument. And that was the whole point of what education was supposed to be, is I'm trying to make the student as smart as you possibly can be. I want you to see both sides of the argument. I want you to see, a potential third side to an argument if there is one. Try and look at this item or this object that we're speaking about, this topic, and look at it from as many viewpoints as you possibly can, and then conclude on your own what your argument is. And so what Thomas is saying, and kind of what Milton Friedman was saying, is just that there's a lot of people out there that are just told this thing is bad, and they go, okay, it's bad, and they don't really think twice about it. They just go, yep, I'm part of the herd. I want to be part of the herd. And that can be frustrating when you really get down to talking about things that truly honestly matter in our society. And rather than presenting a logical argument, people just go, no, you're wrong. Okay, well, how am I wrong? What am I doing wrong? What am I saying that's wrong? You're just wrong. I said it. You're wrong. I'm right. That's the end of the story. And when people do that, it's kind of like, well, now I don't have to have a conversation with you about anything, because I know that that's just going to be your position about whether we're talking about who takes out the trash at night, or if we're talking about what to do with federal spending, So it's just kind of like, okay, you've now worked yourself into a position where I don't trust you, but then you also are a voter. You have, in your mind, you have opinions, which you don't have opinions. You just say things that you've been told to say. And it's kind of like, this is why, in kind of a funny way, this is kind of why this argument about capitalism is sort of kind of funny for young people, because I hear so often where I'll hear young people go, capitalism's bad, and but if you really listen to what they're saying, they're not really saying it. They're actually saying capitalism's great. But they just have been conditioned to say that capitalism is bad, and they don't understand what they're really doing. So I'll give you an example, but it's tax season. And so all these young people are like, I can't believe I have to pay my taxes, but that's capitalism. It's like, no, that by definition is not capitalism. That is by definition taxation. And you shouldn't like it, because taxation is theft. As a libertarian, I believe taxation is theft. So I'm saying to you that, yes, you're right. It does suck. Paying taxes does suck, but that has nothing to do with capitalism. That's taxation. All capitalism means is that if you choose to work a 50-hour job, or work 50 hours a week at one job, two job, three job, whatever, if you choose to work that much during the week and you earn the money that you earned for working that job, that is the capital that you earned, and you should get to keep that capital. That's what capital means. It just means that what you have is what you earned. Some people earn it through ill-gotten gains, and that's not good, but that is not by definition capitalism. That's just people being shitheads. So, but by capitalism, it just means that if you go out and work hard and you make money, that money should be yours to keep. That's all it is. If we were all squirrels and you went out and foraged and collected as many nuts as possible, that's your capital. Like, it's really that simple. But the funny thing is that, yeah, I remember one time there was this one person, and that I knew, and she was talking about how terrible capitalism is, and she went on this tirade about whatever, I don't even know what she was talking about, because whatever. But anyway, the point is that she started playing this video game called Red Dead Redemption 2, and I'm sure that a lot of you have heard of Red Dead Redemption 2, but anyway, she's playing it, and while she's playing it, she has a horse that she's riding around on, and she pulls up to this area where there's a whole bunch of horses, and she tries to collect the other horses, and she goes, this is bullshit. Why can't I collect as many horses as I possibly can? And I'm like, wait, you mean in a capitalist society where you could own as many horses as you so chose, so long as you collected them? And then she just shut up, because her true moment of clarity was, I want to own as much as I possibly can. So you are a capitalist. But in her mind, she can't, or with all the things that she's been told to say through education, as Thomas appropriately calls it, indoctrination, she's sitting there going like, capitalism's bad, CaPiTaWiSm, wait. And it's just like, well, no, like what you really like is capitalism. So just listen to your heart and listen to the things that you actually want. And then that speaks to what you really believe. Like, it's really that simple. But let's continue on with this video here.
And all too often, it's not true. They don't.
Could I ask you, the website again is factsagainstrhetoric.org, and you've already told us that the reason you pulled that together was to produce evidence, to be empirical, to teach students to be empirical, to look at the facts. On the other hand, from this passage I just quoted, from Basic Economics, your book, empirical questions are the questions that must be asked if we are truly interested in the well-being of others. And then Milton just said in that clip that capitalism produces a higher moral atmosphere. I just want to tease this out, that as best I can tell, your insistence on empiricism, on looking at the facts,
Yes.
is because you have a sort of moral groundwork on which you insist. There's a pre-existing sense of morality, of right and wrong, and of our duties to each other. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
All right.
Without that, civilization would just not be possible. I mean, every one of us is vulnerable to all sorts of things. If we couldn't rely on someone, take it from birth. I mean, we come into the world knowing nothing. We don't even know that we need food, much less how to get any. And so you must have a structure out there. It's also true that even as we move toward adulthood and into adulthood and old age, there are times when other people, and lots of them, are essential to our own well-being. I think of all this talk about equality. In a sense, equality is enormously important, and in another sense, it's enormously irrelevant. It's important that we have equality before the law. It's important that we regard each other with a certain kind of equality. But to talk in terms of equality of capabilities is madness. I mean, if you're the world's leading authority on some particular subject, that doesn't mean that you have even minimal competence in 100 other things. And it's one of the most dangerous things in the academic world and among intellectuals in general is they often seem to assume that they know better than other people about all sorts of things, including things that these other people know from their own personal experience. And that's what makes intellectuals so dangerous.
Okay, so again, what he was just kind of saying there at the very end is that just because you are just because you have a certain interest in one field or that you are highly intelligent in that field does not necessarily mean that you now have that to talk about other things as though you are the authority. That's kind of his opinion about what they call intellectuals, or somebody that views themselves to be an intellectual, which is, I have a PhD in this, so therefore I'm the authority on the matter when it comes to that. It's like, no, like people out there can have their opinions and some people are going to prove you wrong. And I think that's the bigger point here, that throughout this whole video, what he's really talking about is just look at subject matter from as many different viewpoints as you can and develop your own opinions. Sometimes you're going to get it right. Sometimes you're going to get it wrong. That's just reality. But I just will say the social commentary I think about young people today is that nobody wants to be wrong about anything. People want to be right all the time. And when they're wrong, they're really wrong. they don't want to be told that they're wrong, and they get in your face about it. Like, how dare you tell me? It's like, well, no, we're talking about a simple math problem. 2 plus 2 does not equal 5. And they'll be like, well, you're looking at it from a different perspective. It's like, no, I'm looking at it from 2 plus 2 is always equaled 4, and it still equals 4. So I'm saying that there's going to be people out there that are wrong, and you just have to know that some of the people that you talk to that are wrong are willing to have an honest discussion. I think that's another fallacy about the internet today, is they just throw you every dumb, argumentative, non-disciplined person that you can possibly think of into your algorithm, and they just flood you with that, where you just sit there and go, people are unreasonable. But the reality is there probably are a lot of people that are reasonable, that are willing to honestly have an exchange of ideas and then say, okay, I can actually see where you're coming from. And I may not change today, but the next time that something happens, like, it's going to definitely weigh in or replay in my mind this conversation that we had. And so I do think that there are people out there that are willing to have an honest discussion. But the reality is that most young people today don't want to have that conversation because, as Thomas said, they are indoctrinated. They're not educated. And they hold on to their degree and say, look, I am educated. It's like, no, what that really says is that you earned a bachelor's of whatever degree in indoctrination. And they don't see it that way. Now, you got to watch this video for yourself and make up your own opinions. And again, I would encourage you to check out his work, a lot of his previous interviews, because Thomas Sowell really is one of the smartest people that I've had the pleasure of getting to learn about in my lifetime. So I just want to say, before I end this video, thank you again to the Hoover Institute for doing this interview, for having content for us to watch. And thank you to Thomas Sowell for sharing all of your opinions with us over the years. I greatly appreciate it. Transparently, I did try to write Thomas an email and just say, I'm not saying this in one way or the other, but, Thomas, you're in your 90s, and you could pass away at any moment. And I'm not trying to say that to be like rude or whatever. It just factually, you could pass away at any moment. And I would feel I don't know if being upset or whatever is the right word, but I would just feel really down if I didn't get a chance to just say thank you. So that's partly why I did this video too. I understand in today's political climate, even me just sharing the opinion I did could have people out there flagging my content or harassing me or whatever, but I will take that risk just to say to you again, Thomas, thank you for what you've done as an American, and I really do appreciate all of your opinions and being bold and following your heart to say these things to the public. So anyway, thank you again, Thomas. Everybody, thank you for checking out this video. Go check out more Thomas Sowell content, and I will see you all again.